وخصوصا لما تكون مرأة بتوب.
En même temps, si la femme est dépolitisée, elle dépolitise pas.
Hello. This is Yasmine.
And this is Leila.
Today we're recording from downtown Tunis, and as you probably have guessed, we have two podcasters here. Our guest today is a former US diplomat and is someone who is passionate about developing technologies to create impact, especially through blockchain. He founded and leads currently Ayadee Holding Corp, which is focused on the SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, which invests and develops its own social impact innovations around uses of blockchain technology.
And he also mentors about how blockchain can be used to reach the UN Sustainable Development Goals, teaches innovation and entrepreneurship at a Tunisian private university. Welcome, Peter, and we're glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure and my honor to be here, so thank you for having me today.
Thank you. So the topic that as you most have guessed so far, the topic that we're going to tackle today is mostly about blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
Blockchain is something that we talk about a lot during this last years, and it's a little bit hard to understand what is blockchain and everything. So.
And usually there's a lot of misunderstanding and confusion when we talk about blockchain. It is usually quickly related to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So let's cut down to the chase and let's clear that confusion and define what is really blockchain and how it is different from what we've mentioned.
Excellent. Thank you. That's a great starting point. So to start with, Bitcoin is the first blockchain. It's the first implementation of blockchain. And because of that, people often think about payment systems and about digital payments and digital currencies. But that's only a tiny fraction of what it can do. And maybe in its essence, it's almost a more boring thing. It's a digital ledger. It's a digital record-keeping system. And in that sense, if I record some data into the blockchain, instead of it being in one point, like in one computer or in one record book, one ledger, where one person could delete it, could change it, it's encrypted and it's shared across all of the computers within that network. So that is what makes the big difference. And why does it make a difference? Why does the sharing of the data make a big difference? That means nobody can delete it. Nobody can change it. And this is where we start getting into a lot of interesting use cases. Now that we have this transparency and the data that can't be changed, that can't be deleted or edited, whether it's anti-corruption, whether it's proving an artist created something, whether it's knowing where transactions came from, whether it's even encrypted communications and proving a record that a message was sent, these kind of record-keeping use cases are actually the most exciting. And this is where we see a lot of different directions, a lot of applications can go from this.
So what is the criteria needed for blockchain to be implemented in any field?
The criteria at the most basic side is really more on the people side. The technology has gotten simpler and simpler. If you have a smartphone, if you have a tablet, if you have a computer, and if you have an internet connection, there can be the ability to create an account. And you need some way, of course, to get funding into that account. Maybe that's having access to a debit card, access to a credit card, a traditional bank account. So people still need access to finance at some level to initially enter this system. However, the usability and the way the systems are made have become easier and easier to use. So now it's more about convincing people that they want to use it and that they accept it, that they recognize that this data that's stored within the system is valid. Whether this is recognizing that, okay, there's a record that shows this artist recorded this piece of music at this time period, that say the courts or any legal bodies may recognize that, wow, that's a valid proof. That's a document that we'll look at to prove that this artist was the first one to create this thing. Similarly, there's records being kept in some countries of housing ownership, of healthcare records, of getting people to recognize that, to use it, in some cases as well, it's university diplomas that are going on to it to prevent fraud in that space of people claiming university degrees they don't have. If you have that clear verification and it's recorded in the system and it's recorded throughout all these computers in the system, people cannot falsify these things. And so that transparency and that level of trust we can have, that we see exactly who entered whatever piece of information, who put it in, and that somebody's validated who that is, whether it's a university who's entered data that you finished a degree someplace, whether we know that that's the ID of that artist, and now we see proof of that artist creating it, and maybe other artists even commenting on it or adding to it or building upon it. We have ways that we can transparently share data, prove things, and people simply know where information came from and what its source is.
Nice. So, per your saying, and we say sometimes this in the technical jargon, everything can be tokenized, and every data that we have in the outside world can be put in the blockchain to ensure traceability and accountability.
It can be, yes. And this is the question of sometimes of if it's worth doing or not. And this was a bigger question 2 or 3 years ago, because now the cost of putting data into the blockchain and the difficulty of it and the speed, it's become cheaper and faster now. If we talked about 2 or 3 years ago, as the technologies quickly evolved to be faster and cheaper, it used to be it was more expensive to enter data into the blockchain. It was more expensive and more complicated and slower to put data into it. And so that was a big barrier where people would say, maybe that's not worth putting into the blockchain. Maybe that's not worth tokenizing. Now tokenizing of data is becoming easier and easier. On the same note, you may have something, as you allude to supply chains, where it may or may not always be useful. Maybe that one supply chain is owned from farm to table by the same company. And if we have trust in that company, maybe there's less reason to tokenize all of their data because they've got an internal record-keeping system, and if it's all within that same company's ownership, okay, it doesn't give us as much added value. But if there's many players in that supply chain, let's say work I've done with the coffee sector, for example, we have a small coffee farmer who's picking the coffee, who's drying the coffee beans, the cooperative they're bringing it to, they're selling through, the middleman who's buying it from them, the shipping company, the coffee roaster, the retailer, the final consumer. There's many different parties, and they don't have a shared traceability. They don't have a shared system of keeping their records. So this is something where this can be a shared system where you see the digital ID of each party that's entering data, and you see, okay, there's where the coffee farm worker entered data about this in. Here's where the transport worker, here's where the roaster entered data. And because they don't know each other, there's not a way they would collaborate to lie, to create fraud around that. And so these independent parties that are entering data into a system that they can trust, that can be built upon, and that gives us that traceability. And so like that, that's where, if we have many different parties, that's where it's more useful to have that than if, say, one entity was owning that data and the whole string of data.
From what you're saying, I guess blockchain is a mean, and there's a whole set of values before it. It's like we don't trust the institutions, the traditional institutions. We don't trust the idea of a middleman. And so the younger generation came with a technology called blockchain. So what are these values that are set before blockchain is used as a mean and a technology?
I really like that question. I think the big aspect is decentralization. The fact there's no central party controlling the data. There's no central authority controlling what is happening in a particular space. This could have been in the past, on the one hand, actors like a big middleman in the food supply chain who's maybe, say, getting a big cut of whatever the transactions are and doesn't want the public to know that. Could be an organization that knows they have bad practices, whether sanitary practices or human rights abuse is happening, and they don't want the public to transparently know that. So having strong ethical values about how you treat people and feeling that you have those strong enough that you're fine with being transparent about what you're doing because you have nothing to hide, that's an important aspect of having that belief in transparency, that belief that you can share everything. There's nothing you need to hide. Because a lot of these supply chains, as well as financial institutions, other types of big corporations, they have things they want to hide and they don't want to transparently share everything. And I've even had companies that I've approached about our own supply chain tracking tools who are saying, oh, that sounds great, and maybe that would help us sell more products, but can we make it so we can delete some of the pictures, or can we make it so we can hide some of the things the workers enter, because we don't really think we want to share everything that we're doing. And that's the kind of company then that doesn't have the right ethical value to benefit from the blockchain, because again, they're not using it right. They're trying to game the system. They're trying to get the credibility for being transparent, but they don't really want to be transparent.
Could that be the reason why blockchain, like there is this whole debate about blockchain and why there are some people who are against using it?
Part of it, a lot of it, yeah, you have the traditional actors who they have their position that works for them, and they don't want decentralization. And this could, on the one hand, be the big retailers, the big manufacturers, the big producers of whatever kind of good, who, again, not wanting to share transparently what's going on in their supply chains or any problems they may have. And that also goes to government interests of, and one of the two big areas of power one could say governments have is the power to control their money supply, and then also power over military, the police. Okay, so clearly blockchain's not taking away the latter, but in that first one, if people can make payments without a government entity in the middle, if they can control the money supply, this is getting more into the crypto side of it where it's more controversial. That's one aspect where governments see a lot of threat, and then they get focused on that cryptocurrency aspect, and they don't think about the data sharing and the other aspects that we've been talking about, of this transparency of the public being able to see data. Even if the government entities might be in favor of this transparency and this anti-corruption aspects, but they're still scared when they hear blockchain, thinking of cryptocurrency. And that's where your first question was so important, of getting over that point of people's fear and that immediate thought of like, blockchain, it must be Bitcoin, and then getting hung up on this financial transaction aspect and not getting to this point of, wait, there's sharing of data, there's digital records. What if you have a digital ID that has all of your medical records in it? You go to the hospital from one country to another, your whole medical history can be brought up by putting down your thumbprint. Similarly, your education records. This is something that's been talked a lot for refugees, for migrants. What if they lose all their papers and they arrive someplace, and an iris scan or a thumbprint could bring up their blockchain-based digital ID and you see everything about that person? This is something the World Food Program has done something similar to this in Jordan already with refugees. They've had more than 1 million refugees they've created digital IDs for that are based on their iris scan. And that's created great efficiencies for not just the World Food Program, but other UN and other donor agencies operating in Jordan that are working with these digital IDs for refugees as a way to distribute cash and benefits and track resources that they make available to them. And similarly, these kinds of IDs could have your education records, your health records, everything could be on them. And so that you control your data yourself. You don't depend on somebody calling to verify, doing a background check. You know the data was entered correctly once by one entity that was trusted, and now you can choose to share that. You can control that data. There's even bigger spaces, maybe for a whole other podcast, about social media and controlling your own social media account with a blockchain-based ID. And there's a lot of movement in that space as well right now.
Definitely, yeah.
Nice. Nice. So you started kind of saying a bit of perspective implementation, like creating your own social media, and inspired by the space we're in right now, which is La Fabrique Studio. How can we imagine practical implementation in the cultural sector and the artistic sector of blockchain?
Well, some of the big things are non-fungible tokens. And the word by itself, NFTs, it sounds kind of scary at the beginning, right? Like non-fungible, what does that even mean? This is the idea that if you have a fungible token is something like cryptocurrency, right? Where every single one of them is the same. You can break into fractions of it. Like I can say 1 Bitcoin is broken into 1 million Satoshis or whatever smaller unit. With a non-fungible token, you've got a digital ID that's tied to that one specific thing. And you could say there's more than one of that thing, but you create a limited number of them. Maybe we say that there's one specific piece of art, and it's either a digital piece of art or it could be a digital certificate that's tied to a real physical piece of art. But by creating that, there's this digital record that either this physical piece of art or this music that you've created that proves you're the creator of it. You made it. There's the time and the date stamp of when it was created, of when it was minted, they would say, for creation. And even if you don't have a lawyer, you don't have copyright that you're proving or patents on something, you can show, no, look, but here's a record. You know that it's in the blockchain. It's unchangeable. It can't be deleted. It can't have been edited. I really created this thing in 2015, 2017, whatever year. And if somebody else is copying you and taking up your idea, you can prove really when you created it. The other aspect about NFTs that's super exciting is they have something called smart contracts as part of it. And these smart contracts are things that just happen automatically. And in the case of an NFT, this could be that that piece of art gets resold. Automatically, the original producer of the art, they'll be paid a percentage, whatever percentage is put into the original smart contract. So maybe somebody has a photograph they've taken and it's being reused and it's being put into several different pieces of media. And normally they would have to chase down the media outlets that are using it to try to get attribution, to prove it was theirs, to try to get paid for that art that they've made. Now, if they've bought through the correct processing, all right, we're going to buy the rights to use that picture, that NFT is going to then automatically pay the original producer, as well as potentially the intermediary owners of the photo, but it'll automatically happen. There's no action needed. Just when I buy the right to that picture, and let's say Mohammed created the picture, and I'm buying it directly from you first, you're going to receive payment from me. Mohammed, as the original creator, is going to then receive his percentage of the payment, and he doesn't take any action to do so. And same thing could be done with music, and is being done with music in some cases. Each time that song gets played, instead of having to chase somebody down for the royalties, it just automatically being transferred back the payment. Now, in practice, the theory is there. In practice, we still see the traditional method happening. But if this would become more widespread, this is a great way for creators to guarantee that they get income, or if not a major income, at least proper respect that they created the thing they made, that they're the owner of it, they're the creator of it, and it can be new ways for them to monetize their work as well.
So you talked about giving value to the artist, and you talked about kind of something being traceable, especially in the history of an artwork. Can we have other implementation of blockchain, for example, crowdfunding for movies?
Yeah. So there's a few different things with the space. Like, let's say for a movie, we decide we're going to sell tickets, and we're going to sell tickets in advance. We'll sell them as NFTs, so non-fungible tokens of these movie tickets. And let's say the theater is going to have 100 people coming to the premiere, and we're going to pre-sell these tickets. You buy the NFT, you've got this digital ID, and it could have a graphic, could actually be very artistically done as well. And you've pre-bought your ticket now to this event, so they've got money in advance to make the film. But you could resell this NFT on the secondary market. Or you could keep this NFT even after the film and say, like, this digital piece of art is proof that I was one of the early supporters. Or the NFT could be a badge that gives you extra rights, like websites that have like rooms that you would enter using an NFT as your ticket. And so maybe there's special online events, special exhibitions, special access to events with the artists, that your NFT would be the badge that you would use to enter that. On the other hand, this pre-funding type idea, it's modeled on something we've seen so far in the textile space. There was something that one of the big exchanges called Uniswap, they created half as a joke, half as a serious project, something called Unisocks. And they created 315 pairs of white athletic socks, just plain white socks. And they created a blockchain-based digital ID, an NFT, for each one of these. They started selling these NFTs for $15 each. You could exchange the NFT for a real pair of physical socks. Just like if you bought the movie ticket, you could exchange that for real entry to go to the movie as well. But people started reselling this. It became so popular that now these 315 tokens for these socks are all sold out, and they're trading for about $120,000 each. Because this is a limited edition special thing, and everybody wanted to be the first one to say they had it. So in the same way, if for an art project, if you had a limited edition special thing, whether it's special first access to go to an event, special access to have events with the artist, whatever like special access you're getting through this could be something people could trade, but also that you could sell well in advance of the event as a way to raise funds and to start out getting ready for a project.
So, what is the benefit to anyone involved in the cultural sector, like while using blockchain and maybe NFTs as well?
So one of the things, again, is if they're tracking the things they've made, tracking their own artwork, their own production, whatever it is, they can have that record of what they've done in the creation process and prove that they're the creator, they're the person who made that thing. As well, then this idea of creating NFTs of their artwork, it could be another financial stream, another way to have income coming in, so to help support artists, show what they've been doing. It also could be digital IDs as a way that they can make their payments, that they could receive payments. And this could be something like a Patreon type thing where people who want to sponsor the work of a particular artist, who want to offer contributions towards the artist, they could globally easily make those transactions. Like there's one website, for example, where you can tip people if you like what they've done. They have a system called diamonds that you can give them. And those diamonds, if you translate it from their cryptocurrency to something real, could range from being like the equivalent of 10 milliams each to maybe up to 200 dinars each. And so, but you'd pick, and you have to have the right amount of cryptocurrency to give them that tip. But you could look at a piece of art, and maybe you're not even buying it. You like their artwork, and you could be any place in the globe, and you could, instead of clicking on a like button like on Facebook, it's a Facebook style page, but you would click the diamonds button, and you'd click how many diamonds you want to give them or what value of diamonds. And again, that diamond in their case is a cryptocurrency that you convert to. But this is something where now, if I'm say in New York and I see the work of an artist here, and traditionally, if I wanted to send them a tip because I liked their work, how would I do that? Would I do a bank wire and spend $60 to send them $5? Do I use Western Union? Do I send them a check or even go into PayPal and pay transaction fees for that? And then PayPal with a cross-border issue presents its own challenges. With this, I could just click, just like clicking like on Facebook, and it'll transfer into that person's account. So this could be a way that artists as well could get more recognition and more funding from people globally who want to be patrons, who want to support their work. We still run into the cross-border issue of conversion of cryptocurrency into local domestic currency and how that's taxed and what regulatory issues we might face with that. And that's, again, a challenge that we see differing issues from country to country. And a lack of standardization of that is one of the other barriers that makes it difficult for not just artists, but others in business and government and other spaces to figure out how do we treat these things and how are they used in the country that I'm located in.
From what you're saying, it seems like blockchain is going to be the new technology, something that is going to make things easier for everyone, whether people who are working in the cultural or artistic sector, or even anyone who wants to use blockchain, like even just from transferring money to someone else, from giving them maybe a gift or anything. But I do believe that also it's something that is trending. Maybe the evolution from using it in different platforms, maybe social media platforms, and anything that can be used by the wide range of people, is still super slow. So why is that?
Well, it's still in an early stage of getting it more usable. Again, there's that fear factor of people thinking about Bitcoin and thinking about payment systems and getting stuck on, is that legal? Can we use that in this country? But beyond that, it's been historically relatively difficult to set up an account, to figure out how to use things. But now new user interfaces are becoming easier and easier. And I think you'll see this widespread when it's as simple as any other app on your phone. For example, I don't know how to make an app for my phone, nor do I want to know how to make an app on my phone, right? But I know how to use lots of apps. My 3-year-old can use lots of apps. But this is something where when this becomes simple enough, which is coming very quickly, that you can use something. You need to just do an activity on your phone, on your computer, and it seems just like anything else you'd be doing, but it happens to have cryptocurrency as the thing underneath it, or blockchain as the thing underneath it, that's either allowing you to make tips, allowing you to save data in a way that's can't be deleted or can't be changed, whether it's allowing you to prove you've bought a ticket to an event. Yeah, this is something, like airplane tickets are as well an easy one for this. This is something that it'll become widespread when it's just so easy to use that you don't think about it. just like you use all the things on your smartphone without thinking how they work, when blockchain is just in the background and you're not having to think about it's even there, that's when we'll see it completely widely used. And that's coming very quickly as it's getting simpler and simpler to use.
Yeah, and from the examples you're mentioning, there's also the effect of a community being very dynamic, a community being very sharing. And if we talk about art, there is no institution or there's no kind of someone particular who's making this special event or who's making this special premiere. Everyone can contribute and everyone around the world can support that artist. There's also, beyond the payment side, there's also like the DAO.
Yes.
So can you talk more about the DAO and how blockchain is using DAOs to prove traceability and sharing?
Definitely. So DAOs are one of the things I'm most excited about in this space, and one of the newer aspects as well. So a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. And so to unpack those words first, let's start. So the fact that it's decentralized, there's no hierarchy. There's no one manager. There's no one leader of it. So it's autonomous because each individual is their own party. So each artist in this case could individually be their own creator, their own self. An organization, okay, because the whole group is tied together. So decentralized, you have all these artists or all these creators, all these fans of the creators as well could be included, who are part of one organization. But no single party or no even small group of parties is the sole decision maker. Nobody really controls it, yet there is an entity that binds them all together. And that is a fascinating new shape. And this is something I even teach my students in entrepreneurship about. Like, no, you have to know this. This is a new form of corporate governance. This is how companies might be in the future and are starting to be. It's legally recognized in one state in the US as well. In Switzerland, you have a lot of these DAOs creating legal entities, but they don't always need to have a legal entity. It could just be you have a membership-based organization. You have these NFTs or digital IDs that prove the membership of each member of it. And like that, if you're a member, you can submit an idea, and the idea that you submit, let's say you're an artist and you're saying, hey, I think we should do a big cultural event in this space. And the DAO collectively has raised a certain amount of funds, or even there's no funds, but the DAO decides as a group what it's going to do. And I have an idea and I want to submit it. When I put it out there, it'll be saved in the blockchain that I've submitted this idea, that it came from me. Nobody can delete that. Nobody can change that. It's still up to the others in this autonomous organization to decide which things should be voted on. And then once deciding which things are on the short list, what to vote for. But nobody can delete or stifle that voice of anybody who's a member of the organization. An example I often talk about would be, what if a big traditional industry like the auto industry, what if Ford Motor Company became a DAO? And I like going to that really far example because that seems like one of the most absurd. Like, what? One of the most traditional companies? It's like a 120-year-old automaker. What if they became a DAO? Well, let's say now we've got a factory worker who says, I have a new solution. I have a new way of doing things at the factory. And that factory worker normally would have one of three things that would happen. They would tell their boss, and their boss would say, no, that's a stupid idea. They would tell their boss, who would say, that's a brilliant idea. Let's go tell everybody, and hopefully they get some promotion, some credit for it. Or they have the third option where the boss says, yeah, that's a brilliant idea, and I'm going to take it because I'm the manager, and I'm not going to give any credit to you. And it's most often that first or that third option, right? Either they said no and the idea died right there and nobody else in the organization heard about it, or that third idea where the boss is taking credit for the work of what someone's done. In a decentralized autonomous organization, there is no clear boss. There could be people who are doing leadership roles in some way of leading the community, but that idea gets out there and it gets shared and it's recorded in the blockchain. Everybody knows where the idea came from. So in that Ford Motor Company example, if, say, a factory worker in Mexico came up with a really good idea and they put it out there, it wouldn't be up to their boss to say yes or no to it. But other workers then, say, in Thailand, in the US, in Germany, and other locations may see that and be like, yeah, that idea fits for us too. And they raise attention to it. And then eventually people start voting on that idea and discussing that idea. And nobody can stifle it. Nobody can shut it down. So I see that same kind of model could be very powerful within civil society, whether it's the arts or other areas of civil society, of ways you could have a very flat hierarchy where you can share ideas and have joint decision making, whether it's on strategies or whether it's on budgets, whether it's on projects to launch, that you have a transparent voting mechanism. It's very clear. You can't falsify it because everybody has to have logged in and have some kind of a digital ID that's been created for them to vote. You can also have the votes be a secret ballot still too. Whereas instead of being around a conference room and feeling pressured, like, do I raise my hand or not raise my hand? Everyone's looking at what I'm going to do. You can have even more effective secret ballots, so it's less likely to feel pressure on people for voting a certain way, yet at the same time maintaining that transparency.
Nice. So when we're going to implement blockchain technology in the artistic and cultural structure, what should be taken into consideration? Like, how can it be sustainable?
Well, you want to see what kind of infrastructure is available for the artists. Are they going to be giving them the basic training, the basic ideas of what can be done? And this can be like, how do they create a digital ID? What is an NFT? What if they're going to be part of a DAO? How does being part of a DAO work? If they're going to be creating records of traditional pieces of art or whether they're creating digital pieces of art. So giving artists the knowledge and of how this works and what it is, demystifying it. I think that's really the first step of getting them, again, back to that very first question of it's not just Bitcoin. And that's really the first step. That's the key thing of demystifying this whole process. And then from there, seeing where people run with it and taking their questions. One of my favorite things, again, is talking to people who are experts in their own space and giving them the basics of what's possible and seeing what they can come up with. Because again, the software developers can build almost anything you ask them to build, but they don't know each of those sectors and each of those spaces. So if say we'd have a collaborative event where we brought together several software developers, and Tunisia's got great software developers, and did like a co-workshop with artists from different fields, with software developers, and then seeing, okay, let's talk together. What can we build? And creating those kind of collaborative spaces, that could be one option or one kind of first step that could be taken.
Nice. And in creating those collaborative space, I always bring this when talking about technology. So we do not repeat the same mistakes that happens with machine learning or algorithm. Is it necessary to have or essential to have diversity in those collaborative spaces and parity while creating platforms for blockchain?
I mean, I think diversity always leads to better ideas. If we have more diverse opinions, more ideas coming in, we're more likely to get better solutions and to think of everyone's perspectives, so that we have ideas that fit for more people. As well, I think the diversity of ideas, not only does it lead to better solutions, but when these things go digital, it's one of the amazing things about blockchain is we can reduce the risk of discrimination, because now all of a sudden, if I see who the creator of a piece of art is, and it's a 64-digit string of numbers and letters, as opposed to knowing that person's gender, nationality, etc., or if we're doing transactions, if we're doing some kind of business negotiation, if it's based on this kind of a digital ID, you don't have that same space for discrimination that you may have had in the physical world. So that's one of the things, not just with blockchain, but the digital world in general, where you can remove some of those prejudices that we otherwise might deal with.
I think also when organizing events and inviting people to work on something like a hackathon on blockchain, it's good to include parity. And then I saw in your website, for example, the Ayadee Foundation, you said it's 50%. So
yes, it was. We're very proud that we managed to get that. When we did the hackathon for the Ayadee Foundation about food waste, the leadership who we reached out to, who we had as participants as well as mentors, as industry experts, that it was overall 50-50 male-female participation in the event. And I think that's very important. We still see in most countries more men than women in the tech space, especially as the software developers. And I think that really hinders us as a society, that if we leave aside a big part of our population from bringing their expertise to this space, we simply won't have as good of results as we would have otherwise.
Okay, so we talked about blockchain, we talked about the basics, we talked about arts and the cultural, like how it can be beneficial for artists and anyone in any sector, really. But what about regulations? What about regulations about blockchain? And now we're not talking just about Tunisia. since we know that it's pretty blurry in here, but like on the wide sector, like on the what are the regulations? Why is there that much fuss, like that much debate? Because every time I read articles, it feels like there are states are against blockchain, while there are people who are so for it and believe that blockchain is the future, really.
Yeah, and that blurriness, not just here but globally, is what causes the slowness of adoption. Because in many cases, people aren't clear what the regulations are in their country, and then they're slow to adopt new projects or new ideas because they don't know if they're going to have a barrier that comes against them, if they're going to be in trouble for doing so. In fact, my country, the US, is the worst so far as a lack of a clarity of regulations. Of maybe there's 4 or 5 different federal level regulators, and then each state has multiple different agencies that might regulate it, and some states are more active than others, or some states give more freedom in how one acts in this space than others. And so because people don't know what the regulators are or who the regulators are, you'll see a lot of blockchain-based projects that say they're open to investment or participation by anyone except for citizens or residents of the United States, because they don't want to risk getting in trouble over that. So that lack of clarity often is what causes people to not enter a space or to not move forward. Even if the rules are strict, if there are clear rules, then companies can find solutions and move into these spaces. But in general, one of the issues is what happens if you're in the payment space with cryptocurrencies and they go up or down in value. Is that an asset, like an equity, like buying stock, that you're paying tax on the increased value? Or is that considered a currency, where if I just say I've got dinars and I converted my dinars to dollars and the exchange rate between dollars and dinars changed, I'm not going to pay tax on that difference of exchange rate. And in some countries it's one, in some countries it's the other in regards to cryptocurrency. And as well then, because cryptocurrency is often the fuel or the underlying factor with many of the blockchain-based projects, people aren't sure how that will impact the projects they're working on or the projects that they're using. And so if there's going to be some kind of a taxable event, or even if they're doing a project that's fully based on, say, the traceability of supply chains, and they're tracing an agricultural supply chain, and they're not sure, will there be some regulator who's worried about how this interacts with the money supply or the payment side of things? And so that slows them down from getting into that space. On the other hand, it's been partly that the technology was slower. It was, even with some of the big networks like Ethereum, the transaction speed can be relatively slow. A lot of the newer networks and newer blockchain networks that have developed in the last 1, 2, 3 years are faster than the old ones. So now the speed at which things take place can be faster. So entering data, recording data, scanning something to see the history of a product, all these things are happening much faster than they did a year or two ago. And so this is becoming more and more usable. And again, the apps that we see on phones, things like that, they're becoming closer to what you just see as your normal phone app, as opposed to something special or something extra where you need to have extra knowledge to use it. So it's simply all becoming more usable than it was in the past as well, more accessible.
I was actually going to ask about what is blocking stakeholders from using blockchain, but I think that you already answered that question. Okay, so blockchain really seems that's something terrific. And personally, like I used to have a general idea from what is blockchain and everything, but from this discussion, I'm having like, I'm getting a lot of knowledge from this. But what is actually I'm wondering about is if there are any cybersecurity threats and concerns about blockchain, since it's a digital technology, everything is going to be digital, you're going to be having a digital ID and everything. So what are the threats and concerns when it comes to cybersecurity?
That's a very, very good, very important question. I mean, so one of them, first off, is don't forget your key. Don't forget your equivalent of a password, because it's something that there's no central authority anymore. So if there's no centralized authority, you can't say, I forgot my password, Google reset my password. No, there's no central authority. You hopefully wrote it down on paper somewhere and didn't lose that paper, or you saved it in a flash drive and didn't lose that. But otherwise, you have generally a public and a private key. That public key is what you share with others that identifies you, and that private key is your password. But it's not as simple as just one word to remember. So with that, you have to, don't lose that, because decentralization has its benefits, but there's nobody to go to if you lose your things. like that you could risk losing access to that, to your information and what you've entered into the system. So this goes beyond payments to say, what if your whole digital ID, what if your whole life and your records was in there? Some new systems people are looking at are having things based on biometrics, like your thumbprint or a scan of your iris or a face scan. So in that case, you've got nothing to worry about losing, right? I mean, short of your thumb being cut off or a horrible accident and you're damaging your face. Yeah, so those are some aspects that are important. But on the cybersecurity side, there's, so far as data being hacked, things like that, if it's stored in one of the larger blockchain networks, like say it's the data is backed up on top, attached somehow to like the Bitcoin network or the Ethereum network or one of these larger networks, or if a public sector entity created its own network, but it had still millions of users or millions of participants in it. What's different with this compared to a traditional database is that you actually have to hack the majority of the computers in that network in order to get control of it. So if we're talking about hacking the Bitcoin network, we're hacking 51% of tens of millions of computers. So short of like maybe some of the largest governments in the world putting all their computing power towards it, there's not a hacker that can take on getting access to that data in that case. They could get access sometimes, though the risk has been to some of these exchanges, some of these centralized exchanges which sounds weird to say centralized in a decentralized network, but you go to these centralized exchanges if you're trading cryptocurrency, for example. This isn't your data for your personal ID, things like that. But in these networks, maybe somebody hacks in and gets control over this exchange, but that's similar to someone also might hack your bank. And these exchanges generally have the same level of security as a large bank would. So there's always that risk of that happening, but no more than a regular bank would have. And again, a normal bank, like a normal database, a normal system, again, that difference with the blockchain, okay, the blockchain, you need that 51% of control over all the computers in the network. If we're talking about an individual bank or let's say university records or something like that, if a hacker goes and finds one weak point somewhere to get into that system, then they can run freely throughout all the data in that system. If they're getting into a blockchain-based network, it's not they find one weak point. They have to really overwhelm the system. They have to take control over 51% or more of the entire system to control it and to get access to it. There was a large central bank in Latin America that had been hacked about 4 years ago, and this was one of the issues they had. Probably one of their former employees knew where the weaknesses were in that bank's database and where the patches were, where the repairs they'd put in for cybersecurity, because it'd be very difficult for an outsider to know. And they found those holes, and they got into the central bank's database, and they, before anybody realized it, transferred away the equivalent of about $30 million US. Nobody knows where it went. Nobody could trace it. Again, it's in the traditional financial system, which is actually harder to trace than a cryptocurrency-based system would be, where nothing can be changed and nothing can be deleted. And so like that, hackers have an easier time with traditional systems. They just find one weak point. They get in. It's like they found an open window of your house. Now they can run everywhere through your whole house. If it was the blockchain, they fight their way into one room of your house. Now they got to fight someone at the next door for the next room and fight again at the next door. And finally, they don't have any access till they control the majority of your house, as opposed to just finding the one open window or the one unlocked door and getting in like a traditional database would be.
Nice. And from my viewpoint of digital safety practices of our banks, I think implementing blockchain in the finance system would be more secure for the bank accounts of Tunisians. I want to ask you, from which state are you?
I'm from New York State.
So do you have any idea if blockchain and cryptocurrency is legal there?
So this is an interesting challenge. On the one hand, New York is booking itself as being the crypto capital of the world. The mayor of New York City has said he'll take his pay in cryptocurrency. He's taking his pay in Bitcoin. On the other hand, the regulatory authorities in New York State, because of the Securities and Exchange Commission, because of Wall Street being there, are some of the strictest in the U.S. so far as their rules. So a lot of cryptocurrency exchanges that are operating even within the U.S. will say, like, we'll work with projects in the U.S., yes, but except for not New York, not California, and usually 2 or 3 other states where the regulations are very strict. So whereas people can open accounts to deal with cryptocurrencies, and there is blockchain used for traceability of products within New York State. The rules are both strict and confusing at the same time, because there's different state-level agencies that have that are arguing over who has regulatory authority over this. And at the same time, there's still also the U.S. national level authorities that aren't clear on what the rules are. So New York is in a weird position of, on the one hand, having more cryptocurrency, more blockchain startup investment money than any place else in the world. I think it was like $1.6 billion in new investments in startups in the blockchain space in New York City last year. On the other hand, they've got this gray area where the regulators are still making it difficult for people to do business in that space.
Can we measure it the same gray area in Tunisia, or it's much grayer in Tunisia?
I'd say it's darker grayer.
Yeah.
Because gray and being mixed up and confused, but darker grayer because people take the pessimistic side of being like, ooh, it's not clear if it's allowed, so let's just not do it. I do know of a couple of startups who are doing interesting things in the blockchain space here. One on traceability, again, in food systems, another who's looking at a system to do remittances between here and France. But I see less startups happening in the blockchain space because instead of having that idea of, okay, the rules aren't clear, but let's keep doing something until we get shut down, there's more like the rules aren't clear and the penalties might be really strict if we can't do it, so let's just not do it. So that's why I say both are gray, but maybe it's a darker gray here than it is in New York at the moment.
But I think that in Tunisia, I don't know, I saw some trainings about blockchain. There are some events where we talk like about blockchain. What is that? Like, and even like you teach blockchain in Tunisia, which is which is pretty terrific. But there is also, it's a little bit weird how we're teaching about blockchain, how we're spreading the word about it, how we're talking about its good use and everything. But at the same time, we're not really allowed to use blockchain in Tunisia.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that comes partly to the confusion about the payment space versus everything else. Because the traceability, the tracking of supply chains, there's no rule stopping that. And the central bank doesn't even, I wouldn't expect them to even care about that. If you're tracing a supply chain, if you're showing what artist created what item as well, that's not something that concerns them. But still people get scared thinking of Bitcoin and blockchain equals cryptocurrency, and maybe that's a gray area, and we're not sure if we can do that. So they stay away from the space entirely. But for example, at the Mediterranean School of Business, at MedTech, at the engineering side of it, there is actually a Master's of Blockchain Engineering that people can pursue there now. And that's one of the handful in the world I've seen where you can do a full degree focused on blockchain. And so, yes, there's some areas where Tunisia is really the leading edge of these things. And there's trainings on it, and there's a lot of space where people are talking about it. And every few months, rumors come again of if the central bank will make movement to create its own cryptocurrency or not. And then the rumors fade, then the rumors come back again on that. So it's not fully clear, but there's a lot of space, a lot of potential that could come here, especially because there's so much young software development talent that you could have an army of software developers building new blockchain-based tools very quickly here. And that combined with the Startup Act and the other benefits for startups to operate here could really make an effective combination to really grow the blockchain space.
Yeah, and it could solve the issue of like the biggest issue, the umbrella issue, which is corruption, by having traceability being done automatically through blockchain.
Yes.
I'm curious though, like how is your journey from the US to here, from a gray to darker gray area, especially of your interest in the blockchain. So I'm curious of how you came to Tunisia and how you started Ayadee Foundation.
So to begin with, it's the second time I've lived here. So the first time I was here, I was working at the African Development Bank. So that was back between 2010 and 2012. And then after that, that's when I left to be a US Diplomat. I was in Cairo, I was in Germany, I was back in DC. And then when I got into the blockchain space at first, I was down in El Salvador working on tracking agricultural supply chains, especially coffee. And that being a supply chain where the coffee farmers at the bottom end of the food chain, they're getting almost nothing. Like of every dinar that's maybe spent on coffee, they're getting 50 millions. And looking at how can we make this more transparent? How can we help the farmers get a better shake out of this as well? How can we give that bean to cup or farm to fork traceability so consumers know where their food comes from, where their coffee's coming from, et cetera. And that's what got me started working in the blockchain space on one hand. On the other hand, on that last role when I was a US diplomat, I was both seeing what our partners at UN agencies were doing, like again, the Building Blocks program with digital IDs for refugees in Jordan that the UN has, as well as looking at what the bad guys I was working against were doing. I worked on counter-Daesh operations, and so looking at what these terrorist groups were doing and what these violent extremists were doing, they were using cryptocurrency in some cases. They were using encrypted messaging. And so these kinds of things that were possible exposed me to what blockchain was as well. So I've seen it from both the light and the dark side of what blockchain could be doing and how it was being used. And then in regards to coming back here to Tunis, that great platform of software talent, the opportunities that the Startup Act creates, also the geographic location of easily traveling back and forth to Europe, to points throughout Africa, at least what seemed like an easy time to travel when I came here just before COVID really spread every place, when travel was easy. It seemed like a great location to be based. And again, I'd lived here before, had really enjoyed living here the first time, so it looked like a great space from which to expand the idea of the startup that I've been building, and also the work of the foundation to be able to be in a location where we'd more easily reach many of our partners as well. And then once I was here, of course, the opportunity with the university came up as well, and I love teaching, so it was a great opportunity to jump on that as well.
I'm actually a little bit curious as well. Like, how did it change from being a US diplomat to becoming maybe a teacher, working on in non-profit sector happen? Like, I believe that those are both different fields. Those are both like different careers. So how was that?
Well, I mean, that was partly due to in late 2017, after about 10 months of the previous White House, of the Trump administration, that was many U.S. diplomats were inspired to do something else around that time. And so, but at the same time, too, that is the same time when I was really learning more about this technology and this space and all the opportunities taking place there. As well, when I'd been a diplomat in Cairo, I'd been doing a lot of projects where I was funding civil society organizations that were fostering entrepreneurship, and a lot of that growth was in the tech space. And so I got to see how tech startups, especially with youth, were really growing, creating new jobs, new employment. And so that got me thinking more and more about that space as well. And so it wasn't that just in my last year at the State Department I started thinking about the tech space, but that had started earlier as well. And the first time I lived here in Tunis, I was part of an organization called Venture Capital and Private Equity for Africa. And through that, and organizing networks through them, bridging the gap between investors and startups, not just here, but throughout the continent. So I'd been looking at that space of technology and startups for quite some years before that as well.
That's such an inspiration.
Thank you.
Great. So we want to kind of conclude and wrap with this question from teaching at the university and from kind of making Ayadee Foundation. What do you see the vision of blockchain in Tunisia, and what future perspective do we have in this technology?
Well, I think looking at how it can bring about transparency and how it can speed up processes, make things more efficient, those will be the main things to be looking at. And I think on the software development side, bringing some of the tech talent that you have here in this country and getting them involved in new projects, new ideas, and then bringing that knowledge not just to those who are on the tech side, but people on the business side. Like I teach management students. I don't teach the software developers. But making them people more aware of like what new things could be developed, similar to how we've talked about the art space of what could be developed, and putting Tunisia at the cutting edge of how can we take the skills this country has already and wrap these new technologies up in it and try to leapfrog ahead and be ahead of other countries and being at the cutting edge of this technology. There's a lot of talent across all sectors here, so looking at how we can adopt this technology and implement it across these various sectors could be a great opportunity for leapfrog advances and then tied to that big economic improvements as well that would make a big difference.
All right. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was a pleasure. Like, I really loved the discussion, everything that you said. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this interview. It has been really dynamic, and it gave a lot of perspective about blockchain, especially blockchain in Tunisia. Let's make it happen.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.